South Korea will continue to be a frontrunner in endorsing and realizing democratic values. President Yoon underlined the commitment while pledging to host the third Summit for Democracy. Montenegrin authorities say the U.S. filed a request to extradite disgraced crypto fugitive Do Kwon before South Korea, which makes the extradition process even more complicated for Seoul. Russia will no longer share nuke information with the U.S., including notices about missile tests. This comes as Washington notified Moscow earlier this week that it would cease exchanging data on nuclear weapon stockpiles. President Yoon continues to pledge a greater global role for Seoul in promoting democratic values. He's attending the hybrid regional session of the Summit for Democracy in Seoul on Thursday as we speak, after opening the leaders' plenary session virtually last night. This as he announced that South Korea will host the third Summit for Democracy. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young has more.
South Korea will champion freedom, human rights and the rule of law as the host of the next and what will be the third Summit for Democracy. That's according to President Yoon speaking at the second virtual summit event, which he co-hosted with the leaders of the United States, Costa Rica, Zambia and the Netherlands. Kicking off the first leaders' plenary session on Wednesday, Yoon stressed the need to defend democracy amid a combination of geopolitical conflicts and competition, which has greatly reduced multilateral cooperation.
특히 지난 세기 인류의 자유와 번영을 이끌어온 민주주의가 중대한 도전에 직면해 있습니다. 규범 기반의 국제 질서를 정면으로 부인하는 권위주의 세력들의 진영화에 더해서 반지성주의로 대표되는 가짜 민주주의가 전 세계적으로 고개를 들고 있습니다.
Yoon also referred to revisionist attempts to change global norms, as well as misinformation that hurts democratic processes like decision-making. To counter such forces and pursue shared prosperity, Yoon said South Korea will advocate freedom in the international arena, having received the support of the global community some 70 years ago from the ashes of the 1950-53 Korean War.
Promoting freedom, democracy and human rights has been at the heart of the Yoon administration's foreign policy. Under the president's vision of turning South Korea into a global pivotal state, the top office says the summit serves as a platform for Seoul to help reinforce a liberal world order.
Furthering such efforts, Seoul will host the third Summit for Democracy, according to a joint statement by Presidents Yoon and Biden on Wednesday. The two leaders said that South Korea's democratic institutions are a beacon of strength in the Indo-Pacific, and that the South Korean people have enduring commitment to government transparency, effective checks and balances, and laws that are responsive to public needs. First launched in 2021 by President Biden, the Summit for Democracy aims to reinforce freedom, civil and political rights by strengthening democratic norms and institutions amid the rise of authoritarianism. Beijing and Moscow's foreign ministries have criticised the latest virtual event, accusing Washington of fueling ideological divisions by framing them as autocratic powers. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
An amphibious landing drill between South Korea and the U.S. is back at the largest scale in 5 years. They're running through assault simulations that involve water, air, and land missions. Our defense correspondent Kim Hyun-sing was there.
Amphibious ships swarm in from sea. Jets streak across the sky, and Marines charge full speed on land. Some 500 South Korean American Marine forces have taken over Hwajin Beach in the southern city of Pohang for the Ssangyong drill, the largest combined amphibious landing drill in 5 years. And it's the day of decisive action, the centerpiece of this 15-day-long drill.
The Allies are running through a realistic simulation of an amphibious raid, working together like clockwork and presenting themselves as a formidable foe. And that you see behind me is a landing craft air cushion, a device used by the U.S. Navy to transport weapons, and just one of the many craft that's been deployed for this exercise.
The Ssangyong drill has stayed dormant since 2018 to keep alive diplomatic relations with North Korea and to fend off COVID-19. However, this year, the exercise has resumed on a large scale. Around 30 vessels, 70 aircraft, and 50 assault vehicles were mobilized for the drill. Korean and American weaponry provided mutual support, like the Allies' amphibious assault ships, the Korean Dokdo, and the American Makin Island.
I cannot think of another or more fitting way to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States of America than conducting bilateral amphibious operations with our ROK Navy and Marine counterparts.
The Ssangyong drill will continue until April 3rd, with upcoming exercises focused on land drills. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News, Pohang.
Russia says it will end the sharing of information about its nuclear forces with the U.S., including notifications on missile tests under the last remaining nuclear arms treaty with Washington after suspending its participation last month. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
First was Russia pulling back from the New START treaty. Now, Moscow has announced it will end the sharing of information on its nuclear forces with the United States. According to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, Moscow has stopped information exchanges with Washington, including notices on planned test launches of its ballistic missiles. He stressed that any notification and all activity under the New START treaty will be suspended and will not be conducted regardless of what position the U.S. may take. The U.S. had already said Monday that it would halt the sharing of information on its nuclear forces following a decision by Russia to pull back from the New START nuclear pact last month. The latest from the Kremlin is all the more concerning as Russian President Vladimir Putin announced earlier this month that it will be moving tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, raising fears that it may use such weapons against Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Wednesday invited Chinese President Xi Jinping to Ukraine for talks, marking what would be the first communication between the two leaders since the outbreak of the war. During an interview with the Associated Press, Zelensky said he is ready to talk to Xi and expressed his willingness for the meeting to take place. The comments come as Zelensky had recently shown his openness to Chinese-led peace talks using Beijing's 12-point peace plan as a backdrop. Xi had previously said that he plans to speak with Zelensky following his summit with Putin earlier this month. However, that has yet to happen, with seemingly no end to the war in Ukraine in sight. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, on to the latest updates on the crypto-fugitive Do Kwon. According to Montenegrin authorities, the U.S. filed a request to extradite disgraced Terraform's lab CEO Do Kwon before South Korea. This was made possible as the U.S. has an embassy in Montenegro, whereas South Korea doesn't. The Justice Minister said that the extradition decision will be based on a number of factors, including the person's nationality, as well as the date in which the request was filed. Kwon will be extradited after he serves a sentence for passport forgery, meaning his extradition process can take some time whichever country he is sent to. The Summit for Democracy, established by the Biden administration to reinforce freedom and transparency, especially against rising authoritarianism, continued virtually on Wednesday. President Yoon opened the second day's leaders' session on economic growth and prosperity. For more, let's turn to Mr. Hans Charlotte. He's a professor of political science at Yonsei University here in Seoul. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dami. Nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Let's first talk about the Summit for Democracy. What is it, Professor, and how significant or necessary is the meeting at this time? Is the summit meaningful anyway?
Oh, I think so, Dami. Anytime you're pulling together countries, world leaders, and leaders of their respective countries to talk about prospects for democracy, it's very important, I think. And you have to keep in mind that since about 2005, almost the past 20 years, a lot of the big think tanks around the world, the research institutes that track the viability of democracy, have found that it's in a pattern of backsliding, both from the top down and from the bottom up. There's been some erosion of the institutions at the national level in many different countries, with leaders that don't necessarily respect the will of the people. Unfortunately, we saw that on clearest display in the United States after Donald Trump lost the election in 2020. And of course, that result, and it led to acts of the Capitol. So even the U.S. has a lot of issues to work out here. And one other thing, bottom up, there's a lot of changes in how citizens communicate with each other in our media landscapes. It's harder for citizens now, I think, to feel as if they have shared understandings of the truth with their fellow citizens, shared understandings of what the issues are at stake for their countries. So anything that can be done, and anything world leaders can do when they come together to talk about how both from the top down and from the bottom up democracy can be greater respected is very important.
Right, so using as a platform for all citizens around the world to voice their collective opinions. And also, South Korea is co-hosting this edition of the Summit for Democracy along with Costa Rica, the Netherlands, and also Zambia. And Korea will host the next Summit for Democracy. The question is, how significant is Seoul's participation? I mean, what role can South Korea play in such a summit?
Well, you have more than 100 countries attending, so it's very important, I think, Dami, that Korea is indeed one of the 5 hosts, and it seems as if it's now positioned to be the lead host next time. So I think the challenge will be figure out how to facilitate some deeper conversation and possibly what other kinds of stakeholders and citizens groups can be brought into the next summit. What we've seen so far are mainly conversations with the national leaders themselves and among the national leaders. And it's the government sector that's mainly here at this summit. It would be interesting, I think, and even innovative if the Korean government, as well as its counterparts, I assume there will be some co-hosts for the next summit as well, can think about how to bring in more civil society organizations from around the world and kind of combine the voices of national leaders with the voices of everyday people. The online technology that's used in these kinds of hybrid gatherings gives some interesting platforms. So I think there's a lot of potential for the summit to evolve further and become something more than what it presently is.
Right. It'll be a challenge for also a pending task for South Korea to invite and engage all those people from all corners of the world. And also, President Yoon hosted the first leader-level plenary session on democracy delivering economic growth and shared prosperity. What are some of the key points that you find notable, Professor?
I was left with some questions, actually. I found the speech interesting. I found some of the terms that President Yoon was using in the speech quite interesting. He lamented, for instance, the anti-intellectualism in the political culture. And I would like, as a professor, of course, and as somebody who works with a lot of students and other scholars, I'd like to know a little bit more about exactly how he thinks about anti-intellectualism. And that's not something that's just restricted, say, to university campuses. We've seen a big pushback in many of the world's democracies against what so-called elites in politics and businesses, a lot of what we call populism, people, citizens voting for candidates to blow up the political system or blow up Wall Street or whatever other financial power center you're looking at, have mobilized a lot of working class individuals that now feel in the present day and age that they don't have enough control over their destinies, and they don't feel as if the people in government or business are looking after their interests. So there's also a kind of anti-elitism that goes along with anti-intellectualism. So kind of confronting these sorts of forces is very important. I mean, anybody can get up at a speech and say, okay, we support freedom and human rights and the rule of law. But there are different ways to understand all these concepts, and there are a lot of underlying factors that prompt both citizens and governments to lose faith in democratic processes. So thinking about how to restore that kind of faith will be very important, I think, for the leaders in not just South Korea, but all the co-hosts and collaborators in future democratic summits going forward.
Indeed. All right, so Mr. Shadow, thank you so much for your insight this morning.
All right, Dami, thank you again for having me. Take care.
You too. With international attention focused on the AI chipbot phenomenon, South Korean companies have also jumped into the race to make one for themselves. One such company is LG and its EXAONE. Our Kim Jong-sil spoke with the developer in charge.
An AI for experts. That's what LG AI Research is aiming for with its large-scale language AI model, EXAONE. Unlike OpenAI's ChatGPT, EXAONE aims to help experts in scientific fields such as chemistry and medicine. With its AI, LG hopes to take advantage of its decades of expertise and accumulated data in chemistry and engineering.
EXAONE can learn 100 years of chemical knowledge in a matter of minutes and can even predict new material candidates, so the process of developing new materials and new drugs can be drastically improved.
Choi added that EXAONE focuses on giving credible results to the user. We asked him how.
There are a lot of documents on the internet that cannot be trusted. That's why LG's EXAONE learns from professional papers and documents that have been acknowledged to be trustworthy. LG's AI can also suggest various ideas to the top 1% of the experts so that they can come up with new ideas.
We also asked him why it's important for LG, a South Korean company, to make this type of AI themselves instead of relying on AIs made by other countries.
In the case of LG, some of our important data isn't supposed to leave the country. And by developing AI ourselves, LG hopes to strengthen business competitiveness for some of our subsidiaries. We think our large-scale language AI will contribute to the business in the future. That is why many companies, not just ones in South Korea, are actively taking part in investment and development of their own AIs.
Choi added that securing talented individuals is the key to success not just for LG, but for companies everywhere, and stressed that LG is looking for talented individuals around the world. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Spring warmth is in full swing nationwide, meaning it's the perfect time for outings. And among places to enjoy here in Seoul are the royal palaces filled with cherry blossoms and green gardens. Our Shin Se-byuk takes us there.
As spring arrives, royal palaces are awash with colorful blossoms. Visitors to Changdeokgung Palace, one of the 5 major palaces from the Joseon dynasty, get to enjoy this lively season.
It's been really amazing so far, being able to come see the castle, especially the cherry blossoms, with the backdrop of all the kind of historical architecture. It's just a very calming place to be.
It's very nice. Everyone in the traditional clothing as well, so it's very pretty sights. All the flowers, all the older buildings as well. It's very cool to see.
This time of the year, special guided tours are also available. This seasonal tour offers visitors a chance to explore the Nakseonje Hall, a Korea's traditional structure that is known for beautiful architecture and stunning gardens. What's more, those who signed up for this exclusive tour can enjoy the sacred garden. Standing next to the pavilion towering over the garden hill, tourists get to capture a beautiful view of the spring landscape in one glance. The tree, standing alone in the field, evokes a sense of tranquility. The famous apricot tree in the neighboring Deoksugung Palace also signals a season of new beginnings. Tourists can travel back to the Joseon dynasty during the 90-minute guided tour. A rare glimpse into the interior halls and backyards is a charm.
Someone put me onto this special tour of Deoksugung Palace in Seoul, and I managed to snag a ticket despite it being in high demand. It was a sweet experience, being able to check out the palace's interior in more detail, including some paintings and artifacts that are usually off-limits to the public.
Tourists can enjoy spring scenery in the royal palaces until the first week of April. After that, the Gyeongbokgung Palace nighttime viewing tour will present beautiful whipping cherry blossoms and azaleas that brighten Seoul's night sky. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start with the United Nations, as the international body has passed a landmark resolution that calls for the world's top court to weigh in on climate obligations.
Well, that's right. Passed on Wednesday by the UN General Assembly at its New York headquarters. The resolution calls on the International Court of Justice to give an advisory opinion on obligations that countries have to address the climate crisis and legal consequences if they fail to meet these. Now, according to the UN Chief, Antonio Guterres, such advisory opinions can have a major impact on international legal order, but they are not legally binding. Now, co-sponsored by over 120 countries and 4 years in the making, the passage marks a major win for the Pacific island state of Vanuatu. It was one of the first to lead the initiative, as it has been disproportionately affected by climate change with adverse weather events. Now, tech billionaire Elon Musk and Microsoft co-founder Steve Wozniak are among 1,100 industry leaders who have signed an open letter that calls for a 6-month halt to the training of artificial intelligence. Now, this is over fears that AI may pose a threat to humanity and that the race to develop it is getting out of control. It outlined that powerful AI systems should only be developed after establishing that the effects will be positive and risks manageable. The letter was published by non-profit organization the Future of Life Institute, which is dedicated to reducing existential risk from advanced AI. Now, the call comes amid growing competition between various AI developers, which has seen the release of ever more advanced systems such as ChatGPT-4. Shifting our attention to Pope Francis now, as the head of the Catholic Church has been hospitalized for respiratory infection. Now, according to the Vatican, on Wednesday, the Pope will be treated for the next few days, and a schedule has been cleared to accommodate his treatment. The news comes as the 86-year-old pontiff has faced a number of health issues recently. He has often been seen using a walking stick or a wheelchair due to knee pain, which also caused him to delay scheduled trips to the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan last year. Now, the Pope revealed in December that he has already signed his resignation letter to be used if he is unable to fulfill his duties due to health issues. And finally, international football governing body FIFA has stripped Indonesia of its right to host this year's Under-20 Football World Cup. According to FIFA, on Wednesday, the decision was made after Indonesia's Football Association, the PSSI, cancelled Sunday's tournament draw because the governor of the island of Bali refused to host the Israeli team. Indonesia is a majority Muslim country with no formal relations with Israel and publicly supports Palestine. Now, the tournament is set to begin May 20th until June 11th, and FIFA says that the dates will remain unchanged for now. FIFA says it will find a new host as soon as possible, while it's also considering sanctions against the PSSI.
Good morning. Today will be warmer than yesterday as highs are forecast to climb into the 20s here in Seoul. Then warm-up continues towards the weekend with a high of 25 degrees Celsius on Saturday. But it's also the dust that will cover parts of Korea. The further west you are, the higher the level of dust you will have today. Jeollanam-do province will have polluted air through the first half of the day. A dry air advisory also remains in place in most central inland regions and parts of the south. Meanwhile, east of Gangwon-do province will be quite windy, blowing at 15 meters per second. So please take precautions against wildfires and drink plenty of water to stay hydrated. Afternoon highs will be 5 to 10 degrees higher than norms, and it's going to feel more like early May than late March today. But if your area is hit hard by that dust, avoid spending too much time outside, which is very unfortunate as the nation is coloring into stunning spring blossoms. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world, like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city, transforming our world, navigating toward a better future.
That's Ungnam.
Ah, okay.
But he looks like Ungnam.
making a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 30th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Happy Thursday. And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, we're going to start with the news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. And the first hashtag is Apple Gangnam. Apple will open its 5th store in Korea this Friday. It will be launched in the Gangnam-gu district of Seoul, greeting Apple users with their latest products and key services, such as the recently launched Apple Pay. And the second hashtag is Ripoff. We've seen cherry blossoms bloom early this year. Because of that, many Koreans have quickly changed reservations to iconic sites to see these spring flowers. As if this wasn't a big hassle, another issue that's been prevailing was stores or vendors near these sites ripping people off. How? By charging a lot of money for the region's so-called specialty. And one person posted on social media how he had to pay roughly $40 for a supposed Jinhae region BBQ barbecue specialty, but he said this was a big ripoff considering the tiny portions. And the last hashtag is Star Wars. Mark Hamill, the actor behind the character Luke Skywalker of Star Wars, has decided to be the voice behind Ukraine's air raid app. Hamill advises Ukrainians to take cover whenever Russia unleashes another aerial bombardment. Here's what he says when the air alert is over.
Attention, the air alert is over. May the force be with you.
May the force be with you. And Hamill said he decided to lend his voice to help as much as he can with the people suffering from the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Now, I'd like to hear what our panelists have to say about the second hashtag, ripoff. A lot of people could relate to the person who claimed he had been ripped off while going to see these beautiful cherry blossoms. And some said certain vendors would make up regional specialties that aren't even there just to rip them off. And I'm wondering, Walter, have you ever experienced this?
Well, I haven't. Well, of course, we've all experienced it when we go to these popular places. But it's not just food that people get ripped off on. It's also accommodation as well. A lot of people who went down to see BTS in October last year might have experienced the hotel prices skyrocketing almost twice as much. And even for the people who pre-booked before the concert was even announced, were asked to either cancel their reservation or actually add more money onto their reservation. It's crazy when things, get very popular.
And I think that's why a lot of Koreans are even thinking of going to Japan to see cherry blossoms because they're just so sick and tired of getting ripped off at these sites. But there's also that say, you know, we should understand these vendors because it's these iconic sites and times of the year that you can attract these customers and really get your sales up, especially considering record inflation. We've seen prices of ingredients going up, meaning higher prices in general. So Cheska, do you understand this side of the topic as well?
I mean, this is always such a conundrum, and you brought both points very clearly. As Walter says, I think we've all been victims in a way when we go to these popular vacation sites or even Europe, and we have these very specific vendors that have slightly higher prices than things that you can purchase a little bit outside of these sites, right? But again, as a consumer, I have one point of view, but from the vendor's perspective, with the record inflation, and also the rent prices that is going up.
Definitely, that's a good point.
I sometimes think that people do have to raise prices to take advantage of this influx of people that are coming in. So this is always a conundrum.
It is a conundrum. It is a tricky issue, but that was our news feed for this Thursday. And let's move on to today's discussion topic. We're going to dive into whether South Korea really is a drug-free country. Take a look at the screen to find out the answer. South Korea no longer seems to be a drug-free country. Recently, local media showed actor Yoon being questioned by police for drug use. The actor allegedly purchased propofol, a sleep-inducing drug, for non-medical purposes beginning in 2021. He also tested positive for marijuana, cocaine, and ketamine, which are all completely illegal in Korea. But a bigger drug problem surfacing in Korea is illicit use among teens. Teens are finding ways to purchase prescription medicine without a doctor's note. The most popular product they're looking for is diatomine, also known as butterfly pills because of the way they look. Normally, it's prescribed for people on a diet as an appetite suppressant.
But it requires a doctor's note because it's a psychotropic, meaning when it's abused, it can cause addiction and hallucinations. And it's easier for teens to purchase them online, which also makes it hard for regulators to catch buyers. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. How severe is the teen drug problem here in Korea? 2. How are young people getting their hands on these drugs in a supposedly drug-free country? 3. How are other countries dealing with drug problems among the younger generation?
So today we're going to be talking about a relatively grim subject, drug abuse among teens in Korea. So Cheska, why don't you start us off by explaining how severe of an issue this is?
And this is a truly grim subject, but I do feel that we need to face the reality of the situation. So South Korea is no longer safe from drugs. And for every 100,000 people, if the arrested drug offenders exceed 20, now that's what's considered a red flag and sort of out of control in the system. At the moment, currently in South Korea, we have 25 to 35 drug offenders. So we've already passed the limit. And the most concerning part is that on average, 35% of the total arrests were in their teens and under 20. And if we take a look at the screen, we can see these figures more in detail. And if you look at the red bar, it represents arrested drug users under 30. So this is not including those in the 30s. Now that alone comprised more than 40% in 2018. But take a look at the numbers. In just 3 years, the number of drug offenders almost doubled. And so did the percentage of people. And this is a very clear and dangerous sign of how fast drug abuse among the younger generation is spreading. And really, this is a sort of emergency call for an immediate action, I feel.
And it's quite alarming because, as you said, drugs are illegal in Korea. We're supposedly a drug-free country.
Supposedly, yes.
Yeah, but how are a disturbingly growing number of young people getting their hands into illicit drug usage here in Korea?
You know, that is such a great question because some journalists did a social experiment to see how much drugs they can actually get, something as dangerous as fentanyl in a day. So he went around and, submitted not only his ID, but other people's ID. And he was able to get multiple prescriptions from hospitals that did not even check. So this is just a clear indication of how serious the problem is.
Definitely.
And for young teens, because they can so easily get their hands through prescription, they don't realize the gravity or the destructive aspect of the drugs. So the lack of regulation in these prescriptions have actually further exacerbated the situation, I feel.
And as you mentioned, fentanyl is a prescribed drug. It's usually a painkiller, but it's 100 times more potent than morphine, which means you definitely need a doctor's note. But people are illicitly using it, right? And Walter, then once again, I would like to ask you this question as well. How are so many young people getting their hands on this?
Well, it's not just people who are not checking the IDs properly. It's also the possibly dodgy doctors that are out there that are taking money under the table and also just keep prescribing people who basically might not even need the drug, but are also abusing the drug as well. So this is the case with other prescribed drugs such as ketamine and propofol, drugs that also have this anesthetic effect. Obviously, the most recent news, and as we mentioned before, is coming out is the Yoon case, right? This is obviously making huge headlines around Korea. It is good to see that we are trying to work on stopping it, but there's obviously got to be a lot more done. People are also, there are many different ways you can get it. One of the, I guess, you wouldn't say easy ways, but very dangerous ways is the dark web.
The dark web.
Yep, so people are going through the dark web. These days it is a little easier to get on there at least, but yeah, it's a way that people are going to get their drugs these days.
But I'm wondering, it might be a quick and easy decision, but it's a long, life-lasting consequence that you have to, bring onto your whole life.
Right.
But why are people doing this? Why are we seeing a growing number of people using drugs here in Korea?
And I just want to highlight on the younger generation part as well. And as you mentioned, Yoon, it's so easy to get in, but almost impossible to get out because there's the addictive part, right? And they make such easy deals, as Walter mentioned, through the dark web, but also through social media. And they even use cryptocurrency that leaves no traces. So they make deals through, on the web and use special lingo. So we could be having a conversation right here, and then I could be talking about a drug using lingos like, hey, do you want a candy? Do you want like a chocolate bar? And then nobody would notice.
Right.
And then they also, just within a day, you can place an order, purchase it, and then receive it. So it is extremely scary how fast things are moving at the moment. And according to an expert report, the more problematic aspect is the younger generation don't know the gravity of the situation, so they have little to no guilt. And they usually do it as a group entertainment or through peer pressure by doing it with children in the park or even in schools. So they feel this kind of herd sentiment that we're all in this together, and they use it as an a release of stress or just to escape the situation or the reality of what they're facing at the moment.
Right, and apart from like a lot of outlets and social media making it easier for them to access these types of drugs, what are other reasons that teens are getting their hands dirty with this?
Well, to be honest with you, it could be just, let's just call it life. Basically, the pressures and the stress that people go through, they need to find outlets to I guess, release that stress.
Right.
Obviously, alcohol is a big thing amongst teens as well. You've seen many underage drinkers as well, but now it's becoming more prevalent these days with drugs. Let's say we know that the education system here is quite tough for the students. They have a lot of exams to go through. The pressure to do well is always there. So some teens are looking at ADHD medicine to just concentrate. But then what happens is they get hooked and they start to abuse it. So this is obviously something that we need to address.
And that's why I would like to see if this situation is also prevalent abroad as well. But I know that some countries like the United States have partly legalized certain drugs like marijuana, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So at the moment there are 38 states for legal medicinal marijuana and 21 states for recreational use in the US. Now, it goes all the way back to California in 1996 when they made it legal for medicinal purposes only. And now it still seems to be changing. As far as last year, 3 states, Rhode Island, Maryland, and Missouri, made it legal for recreational use. So there is a lot of change happening in the US.
So maybe selectively legalizing a few drugs will help with the teen drug abuse problem or drug misusage in general. But to find out more, why don't we include a professor and medical director of addiction medicine from the United States? We're now going to include a professor and medical director of medicine addiction in our talks. It's Dr. Anna Lemke, author of the book Dopamine Nation. Dr. Lemke advocates better teaching programs on addiction and safe prescribing. She also educates policymakers and the public about the reason and solutions behind drug addiction. So it's great to have you with us, Dr. Lemke.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, Dr. Lemke, so as you might have heard from our discussion today, more teens in Korea are getting their hands on prescribed drugs without a doctor's note, and some are even getting hold of narcotics. So I would first like to ask how the situation is like in the United States.
We have a devastating situation of drug addiction and drug overdose here in the United States. It's been going on for at least the past 20 years, as we've been seeing a quadrupling of the number of people addicted to prescription medications, particularly opioids, but also benzodiazepines like Xanax and other psychotropics like anxiolytics and antidepressants. And along with that quadrupling in the number of people addicted to prescription painkillers and anxiolytics, we've also seen rising rates of individuals dying from drug overdose. This past year, we had 107,000 Americans who have died from drug overdose, with the majority being between the ages of 25 and 35. So it's a huge problem.
It's definitely a grave situation. And Cheska, you mentioned that a lot of teens and youngsters aren't aware of the gravity, right?
And because they aren't aware of the gravity of the situation, they get in, but it's too late for them to get out because they're already hooked on these drugs.
And that's why I would like to ask you, Dr. Lemke, could you explain to us what exactly are the dangers of misusing drugs from a young age? Especially, could you tell them to teens?
Well, the dangers are the changes that happen in the brain with exposure to addictive substances. And these brain changes lead to a lot of problems for people, including that they need more and more of the drug over time to get the same effect, when they try to stop using, they go into such painful withdrawal that they're not able to stop using even when they want to. Then they marshal all of their resources to getting the drug, using the drug, hiding their drug use. And before you know it, it takes over their whole life. We talk about this concept of the hijacked brain. But even separate from the process of addiction, one-time use can lead to death. We have a very serious situation here in the United States where so many young people associate a pill as being safe without realizing that some of those pills are actually counterfeit pills that have fentanyl, for example, a highly potent opioid, which you mentioned is 100 times more potent than morphine. And so even with a single exposure to one pill, we have teenagers who are dying. They go to a party, someone says, "Oh, try this." They don't even know what they're taking, and they die from a single exposure. So it's the risks of addiction, which are cumulative and usually take some time to develop, and then there are the very serious risks, including death of even just a single exposure, because people don't actually know what they're ingesting.
Right, and I think it all comes down to regulation. And we mentioned it before we started our Skype interview with Walter, that the United States seems to have partly legalized marijuana in certain states. And we're wondering, is that one way that we can control and better regulate drugs from getting in the wrong hands, getting in the right hands? What do you think is the most effective way to stop teens or people who shouldn't be on drugs from getting drugs?
Well, you don't want to conflate regulation with legalization. So invariably, every time we legalize a drug, more people use the drug, and there are more public health harms associated with the drug. We see that with cannabis. We see that with every prescription medication, whether it's opioids or benzodiazepines. So I don't think legalization is necessarily the answer, and in many instances, it's the wrong thing to do. But what we do need is more oversight and regulation of prescribing of potentially addictive and lethal drugs. In this country, our opioid epidemic, we have in part tackled that by creating much stricter regulations and oversight, not just of prescribing doctors, but also of the pharmacies that dispense the medications, of the manufacturers that make and promote the medications, the distributors that get the medications from the manufacturer to the pharmacies, the kinds of drug promotion, things like trying to regulate the dark web and other illegal internet pharmacies. So you've got to have regulation. You've also got to combine that with education. People need to understand the true risks of these drugs. There are definitely medical indications when, psychotropics, opioids, benzodiazepines, stimulants are very useful, but it's a very narrow situation. And when we go beyond that narrow situation, we do more harm than good. And then finally, you also have to recognize that there's going to be a subset of the population that's going to get addicted, and those individuals need access to treatment. So at the same time that you're working on regulation and oversight, it's important to build up a treatment infrastructure. For example, that young actor who's talking about propofol. Propofol is a very serious and potentially lethal sedative. Definitely. I mean, the gap between the lethal, deadly dose and the dose that people take for effect is very, very small. Someone who's using propofol is probably very deep into an addiction because it's so dangerous. So instead of stigmatizing that individual, what we need is to make sure that there's treatment for that person so that they can get into recovery, because recovery is real. Recovery happens. It's not just a one-way street. Addiction is a difficult disease, but people do recover, and they have very meaningful, happy, thriving lives in recovery from addiction.
Definitely. So it's better that we help them rehabilitate, we help them come back to society rather than stigmatizing them.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lemke. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, now here in the studio, any points that Dr. Lemke made that really fascinated you, Walter?
Well, she actually pointed out the one pill that can, contain anything within it, therefore can damage somebody. I've heard many cases when I was living in Australia about people who go to festivals, they sell these drugs during the festivals, and in some cases, yes, death is the terrible thing, but also there's been brain damage cases as well, where it just affects everybody within the area and the families. So yes, it's not even worth once.
And I loved how she said the legalization is relatively, it is needed, but more importantly, it's about regulation and education. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, I agree on that point. And also the fact that stigma needs to disappear in order for us to move forward. And also the fact about hijacked brain, because this is a chemical, and there isn't actually data from Korea's prosecutor office that the repeated offense for these crimes are twice higher, so 35 to 40%, so twice higher than the average of any other crimes, which means there's an addiction part is so strong.
And that's why rehabilitation is so important. But why don't we now include our viewers in our discussion, and let's find out what type of regulations or restrictions their countries have against illegal drugs. So if you take a look at the screen, Tiris Bell says, there's a pretty big opioid and fentanyl crisis going on right now in the part of the U.S. I live in. Sentences for possession of these are very strict, often resulting in multiple years in prison. Leon Teo said in Singapore, the penalties on doing illegal drugs is really strict, with the most severe sentence being death penalty. D.D. Winfrey says it's a shame that people do discriminate against any use of narcotics. Portugal has decriminalized drugs now so that the glamour is gone, and drug abuse has definitely decreased. Now, I think this is a good segue into our final part of our discussion. So why don't we dig a bit deeper into the drug problems? Drug regulations and penalties might be effective in the short run, as we've been talking about. But I think the thing with drugs is that people who are hooked on them recurrently end up in jail or have to go to rehabilitation because, as we mentioned, it's quite addictive. So here in the studio, apart from criminalizing drug abuse, what do you think needs to be done to help people, starting with Walter?
Okay, so to me, it all starts with education from a very early age. Schools should be the ones to teach the dangers that some drugs can have on one's life, but not just on one's life, the people around them as well. I mean, if you loved your family, it would be you don't want to put them underneath this pressure with you. Well-funded, well-run government programs need to be implemented. Though we might not have a bigger problem compared to, let's say, some other countries, we really want to nip this in the bud before it gets too serious. Now, truthfully speaking, South Korea's biggest legal drug is alcohol at the moment, and we see from time to time again how people's lives can be ruined just from alcohol abuse. So if we don't do something about this drug problem that seems to be slowly creeping in, I'm really scared for the South Korean public.
And Cheska?
I love Walter's comment, and I completely agree with him on the need for education. Another thing that I would like to add on is the stigma part. So we really need to raise awareness, and as the doctor said, rehabilitation is possible. So in order to get rid of stigma, we need to raise our voices and say rehabilitation is necessary and people actually can get better.
All right, and hopefully our discussion could pave the way for South Korea to regain its title as a drug-free nation. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainha.
Pleasure's mine, thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Always lovely to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.